Welcome back to Rapture Tales. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get ready for another story you won't forget. Let's dive back to the story. Edward Kingsley had everything most men spent their lives chasing: wealth, influence, and a name that commanded instant respect. His days were consumed by meetings and decisions that moved thousands of lives, yet his nights ended in an echoing penthouse filled with silence. 2 marriages had collapsed under the weight of his emotional distance, leaving him convinced that love was an unnecessary complication. What haunted him most was not the failure of romance, but the realization that his vast empire would one day have no one to inherit it. He often replayed memories of his own childhood, marked by a distant father who provided everything except affection. Edward had grown up learning that provision was love, that control meant safety. Now, standing at the height of success, he feared repeating the same emptiness he had inherited. The thought of dying without leaving a part of himself behind unsettled him more than any business risk ever had. That fear slowly hardened into resolve. If love had failed him twice, then emotion would no longer be part of the equation. He would secure an heir the same way he secured contracts, cleanly, logically, without attachment. To Edward, it felt like the only solution that guaranteed certainty. The idea followed him relentlessly, growing sharper with every quiet evening. Doctors' visits and subtle warnings about age only added urgency. Edward began researching discrete arrangements, surrogacy laws, and legal safeguards with the same precision he applied to mergers. He convinced himself this was not cruelty but clarity. No broken hearts, no false promises, just mutual benefit. Yet something about traditional surrogacy felt distant and impersonal. He wanted transparency, someone he could see, someone who understood the terms fully. His advisors warned him about emotional complications, but Edward brushed them aside. He believed emotions were manageable when expectations were clear. The plan solidified the night he signed off on a £1 billion acquisition and felt absolutely nothing. That emptiness confirmed his belief. Legacy mattered more than feelings. All he needed now was the right person, someone desperate enough to accept his offer and strong enough to disappear afterward. Lily Hart woke each morning to the cold by the concrete and the dull ache of survival. Once, she had been a promising art student with dreams painted in bright colors, but tragedy had erased that life piece by piece. An orphan before adulthood, she had lost her last foster home after an accusation she never fully recovered from. One mistake, one bad decision, had pushed her onto the streets. Despite everything, Lily still carried a sketchbook everywhere. It was frayed, water-stained, and precious. She drew faces she imagined, homes she never had, and futures she barely believed in. Art was the only place where hunger and fear loosened their grip. But talent did not pay for shelter, and hope did not keep her warm at night. Each day she told herself this was temporary. Each night, that lie became harder to believe. Pride kept her from begging, and fear kept her from trusting. She survived by staying invisible, unaware that her quiet resilience was about to intersect with a man who saw life as a series of calculated outcomes. Their meeting was accidental, unremarkable to anyone else. Edward noticed Lily while exiting a charity board meeting, her sketch catching his eye as she sat near the pavement. There was focus in her expression, a stillness that contrasted sharply with the chaos around her. Curiosity, something he rarely indulged, made him stop. He asked about her drawing, expecting a rehearsed plea. Instead, she answered plainly, guarded but honest. When he asked where she lived, she hesitated before telling the truth. Edward studied her not with pity, but assessment. In her, he saw a vulnerability paired with strength, a balance that intrigued him. He surprised himself by returning the next day, and the next. Their conversations remained brief, careful. Lily sensed he was different from the others who passed by, but she did not yet understand how deeply his attention would alter her life. Edward's proposal came without romance, stripped of embellishment. He explained the terms calmly: financial security, medical care, education funding, and complete freedom afterward. In return, she would carry his child. Lily listened in disbelief, suspicion battling desperation. It sounded unreal, dangerous, too good to be true. She asked questions. He answered, every one without flinching. There was no seduction in his voice, only certainty. Lily walked away that day shaken, but the offer followed her into every cold night, an empty meal. It represented escape, but also risk. Days later, hunger and hope pushed her back. She agreed, not because she trusted him fully, but because the alternative was slowly disappearing. When she signed the contract, Her hand trembled. Edward watched closely, unaware that this decision would unravel everything he believed about control. The mansion Lily moved into felt like a gallery rather than a home, pristine, silent, intimidating. Staff treated her politely but distantly, as if unsure where she belonged. Edward's sister, Margaret Kingsley, made her hostility clear from the start, her eyes sharp with judgment. Margaret saw Lily as a threat, a stain on family dignity. She questioned her manners, her clothes, her past. Lily endured it quietly, reminding herself why she was there. This was temporary. She repeated it like a mantra. Edward remained distant at first, honoring the boundaries he had set. But small gestures began to surface, checking on her meals, arranging appointments, ensuring her comfort. Without realizing it, he was already bending his own rules. As the weeks passed, Lily's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and the walls between them thinned. Edward noticed how Lily retreated into her art when overwhelmed, how her laughter surprised even herself. On impulse, he converted an unused wing of the mansion into an art studio. The gesture stunned her. No one had invested in her dreams before without expecting something in return. In that space, Lily felt human again, not just a means to an end. Gratitude softened her fear, and trust began to take root. Late evenings found them talking longer than planned, sharing fragments of their past neither had voiced before. What began as a transaction was quietly becoming something far more dangerous, something neither of them was prepared to name. The emotional distance Edward had relied on for decades began to erode in subtle ways. He found himself listening more than speaking, noticing Lily's moods before she voiced them. When she spoke about art, her words carried life, not desperation. Edward realized he admired her resilience, the quiet dignity she maintained despite everything she had lost. It unsettled him, because admiration was never part of the agreement. Lily, in turn, saw past Edward's controlled exterior. She noticed the way he lingered at the studio door, pretending not to watch her paint. She sensed the loneliness behind his efficiency, the child in him still waiting to be chosen. Their conversations grew warmer, safer, and more personal, blurring lines they had both sworn would remain intact. One evening, vulnerability overtook restraint. A shared silence turned into a shared confession, then into closeness neither had planned. The moment changed everything, not because of passion alone, but because both felt seen for the first time in years. The next medical appointment altered the fragile balance they had found. The doctor's calm announcement, twins, hit Edward harder than any corporate shock ever had. A son and a daughter, 2 lives depending on him. His carefully controlled plan doubled in weight instantly. Lily's joy was mixed with fear. Twins meant more responsibility, more scrutiny, and more uncertainty about her place in Edward's world. She worried the situation had become too complex, too emotional. What if he regretted choosing her? Edward reassured her with actions rather than promises. He adjusted schedules, expanded preparations, and became visibly protective. For the first time, legacy was no longer abstract. It had heartbeats. Margaret's patience snapped when she realized Lily was no longer temporary. She saw her influence over Edward weakening and decided to act. Her solution came in the form of Victoria, Edward's ex-wife, who still carried ambition disguised as affection. Victoria arrived polished and familiar, speaking of shared history and unfinished business. She smiled at Lily with thinly veiled contempt, planting doubts wherever possible. She suggested that stability, not love, was what the children needed, subtly positioning herself as the answer. Edward wavered briefly, not from love for Victoria, but from habit. Yet seeing Lily retreat into herself reignited his clarity. He dismissed Victoria firmly, choosing present truth over past convenience. Margaret, furious, exposed Lily's past, a minor criminal record born from desperation. She expected disgust, rejection, retreat. Instead, Edward listened. Lily told her story without excuses, voice steady despite trembling hands. Edward recognized strength, not shame. He defended Lily openly, severing Margaret's influence in the process. It was the first time he chose a person over perception. The birth came unexpectedly, intense and transformative. Edward held Lily's hand through every moment, fear giving way to awe. When he first held his son, then his daughter, something fundamental shifted inside him. He cried, not from pride, but from release. Lily watched him soften, realizing she had changed him in ways no contract ever could. Weeks later, Edward brought out the agreement that had started everything. Without ceremony, he tore it apart. No lawyers, no clauses, just choice. He asked Lily to stay, not as obligation, but as family. When he proposed, it wasn't grand, but it was real. Their life rebuilt itself quietly, intentionally. Love replaced transaction. Healing replaced fear. What began as desperation became devotion, and together, they created what neither believed they deserved, a home. That's all for today. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.